Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar, which is called Can You Hear Me? So I guess I may as well start by asking that very question, can you hear me? Apparently 95% of virtual meetings start by everybody asking that. So one of our objectives today, of course, is by the end of this session, you won't need to, because people will hear you loud and clear. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Morgan, CEO of Herrmann International Asia, and I'll be your host today, running through the webinar. Now, before I introduce Paul is Vicky from Total Interaction, I want to kick this webinar off with a quick question, and you'll notice on the bottom of the screen there's an arrow flashing at the chat function, and what I'd love you to do is to put the answer to the questions in the chat, and let's see where we are. So here's the question. What year was video conferencing first introduced as a commercial solution? So what do we think? What year was video conferencing first introduced? Arlene, yeah, 2001, 1995, 1972, 2000, 2004, early 80s, 90s, lots of 90s, lots of 2000s. A couple of people saying I've no idea, but you know, thank goodness. The 80s, the 70s. Michelle Jones, the 60s. That's actually getting warmer. I got a real surprise, I guess, when Paul and I were getting ready for this and we discovered the actual year. And it's a lot earlier than you think. And it's 1968. What also surprised me about 1968 was I was just in my teens, but I actually went to the New York World Fair in 1968. But I didn't see video conferencing. I do remember, though, that telephone with the buttons on it and so forth. So, yeah, a lot of comments coming in about, yeah, wow, that's a long time ago. And yet, if you were like me, I never came across video conferencing in 1968 or 1969, or I guess most of my business career, running a business, you know, and running training programs. It was all face-to-face until, when was it? February, March this year, when, I don't know about you, but my world changed. When coronavirus came along, COVID-19, we were in the first the lockdown, and between March the 14th and March the 20th in 2020, 62 million downloads of video conference software. And I would suggest that most of those were probably Zoom, weren't they? And during that time, if you were like me, you got completely, you know, zoomed out by these meetings. We were all sent home with our kids, our dogs, our cats, everything, to homeschool, work and everything else, with little or no guidance. But, you know, that was I guess, the old normal, the lockdown normal. And then there was, and there still is, a huge conversation about what is the new normal? What is the next normal? Now, I don't know about you, but I think, just getting used to the fact that certainly in Australia, how lucky we had been, you know, to perhaps knock the virus on the head, and we could look forward to the next normal. With what's happening, of course, in Victoria and anywhere else in the world, I'm not too sure that that's the case anymore. But the interesting thing, regardless of what the new normal, the next normal will be, a survey has shown that, you know, around 41% of employees are likely to work remotely in the future. The world has shifted. We've got now that mindset. Yeah, I might come into the office on Wednesday, but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, I'm going to work from somewhere else. So a huge, huge shift, all right, on what the new normal is. Now, I guess the challenge, therefore, is that unlike 1969, video meetings are here to stay. That's the reality. And even if you go into the office, probably others haven't. So they're at home. The challenge we face, and I'm sure you've all had this, is can you hear me? Is video conferences, video meetings in particular that we're talking about today are not always that effective. Now, before I introduce Paul, a couple of housekeeping items, and I can see a couple of you in the chat have already asked. Yes, we are recording this. That'll be available, and yes, they're going to be the slides as well. So the answer to those questions is yes. We'll be going for just under the hour. So we'll honour the fact that, say, you will all have commitments after this. There is the chat feature. There's also the Q&A feature down the bottom. So if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. My job is going to be to read those and, I guess, pose them to myself and Chris as we, Paul, as we go through this. And hopefully we will answer most of them. It just depends, say, how many questions we get. So that's the format for the day. Now, to tell us, I guess, how we can make meetings a little bit more effective, I'll introduce you to Paul, who's CEO of Total Interaction. And I think for me, the important thing about Paul today is that he's been delivering a virtual training and running his business across 16 countries virtually, not since 1968, looking at his photograph, but certainly from about 2003. And he's got a lot of clues, say, as to how we can make our meetings more effective. So, Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the housekeeping. We'll be covering all that sort of stuff as we go through. Okay, Michael, it's great to be with you, and Michael and I are going to bounce off each other. I've known Michael for years. In fact, Michael did my HPDI certification. I'll talk to you briefly about what that certification is about. But just to get a little bit deeper into what we're talking about and why it's so important right now, let's have a look at something here. I don't know about you, but I do a lot of Zoom calls, more than I've ever done before. So there's a lot of activity. The challenge is not a lot of things seem to be getting done as quickly as they used to be. And you have to wonder why that is. And we get this feedback all the time from our clients, from our partners, doing lots and lots of meetings, but not necessarily getting done what we needed to get done. And we have to ask ourselves, is that just because of the environment that we're living in with coronavirus, or is it possibly something we're missing in the way that we're communicating? So I want you to think for a moment. Face-to-face meetings, when you used to do them, when you used to go out and see, and what we're looking at here is business meetings, not just meetings with the team, but when you've got a meeting with a key stakeholder, someone like that. A face-to-face meeting, there was a bit of effort required in face-to-face meetings. You think back to that time when you had one, the last one you had to book a time. I'm just thinking about the last one I had to book a time, book a place. I had to get in the car, I had to go somewhere. They actually booked a meeting room or maybe even a coffee shop. We got to that place and we knew we were there to get something done. And because we all knew we were there to get something done, generally things got done after it. Now what you're doing is you're having face-to-face meetings at a touch of a button. It's that simple. So we've been doing a bit of research with our clients and their clients about how they view these face-to-face meetings done virtually at a touch of a button. And this is what we found. It seems that the less effort you make, the less forgiving they are, and the more expectations they have. So we really, really need to up our game. If you want to achieve the same results you used to achieve face-to-face, then you need to up your game. And this is what today is all about. How you can up your game in virtual meetings using a much more sort of advanced way of looking at things. If you go to the web, and we do regularly look at this because we've been dealing in this area for many, many years now and looking at best practice, there's lots and lots of information out there on what you can generally do in, you know, Zoom meetings or face-to-face meetings, virtual meetings of different types. But we're going to take a little bit of a different approach, and we're going to use the whole brain thinking methodology to look at it as a lens from a perspective of looking at virtual meetings. And Michael, you know a lot, obviously, about whole brain thinking and about HBDI, and I'm just going to cover it in a very, you know, I'm just going to touch on it today. But feel free, Michael, to jump in.
Yeah, but I'll be listening carefully. So
what I thought we'd cover off is there are going to be people on this call who haven't come across whole brain thinking, who don't know what HBDI is. So we'll just spend 5 minutes on that. So it's not supposed to be a debrief or a deep explanation, but at least enough for you to understand it, and also how it relates to what we're talking about today. Then we're going to look at virtual meeting frustrations. Now, this is going to be an interactive piece, so be aware you're going to be asked to press a couple of buttons and add in a few things in the chat functions. And what I'm hoping that we're going to get out of this is to give you an indication of where your thinking preferences might be and what you might be doing to frustrate other people before we get into what you need to work on. So rather than looking at this from a very generic perspective, I'm going to try and hone it down so that you come away from this webinar with maybe 2 or 3 very, very practical things that you can do on the next face-to-face virtual session you run, you know, an important one with a client or a customer or a partner that you can do to compensate for some of the things you may not naturally do. Does that make sense, Michael? Yeah? Sweet. Okay. So if that's setting all up, let's get into it. Whole brain thinking. What is it? All right, so I'm going to break this down into 2 areas. You've got whole brain thinking and you've got a thing called HBDI, the Herrmann brain dominance instrument. And whole brain thinking, it's an amazing tool that we've been using for many, many years. And what it does is it looks at 4 quadrants of thinking, and it forces people to think holistically about a subject, whatever that subject is. Only 3% of the population naturally whole brain think. So it's extremely useful when we work with clients who aren't necessarily whole brain thinkers or teams who are not whole brain thinkers. You can see the blue quadrant is essentially logical, rational thinking. The green quadrant here is organized and systemized and process thinking, so getting the process right. The red is sort of people-orientated, feeling-based thinking, so very much more around people. And the yellow, which is both of Michael's and my preference, which we need to work on our green, right, Michael? So the yellow is sort of big picture, holistic, future-orientated thinking. And it's really useful when we use this model to do planning on a variety of areas.
I was just going to say, Paul, on that point, today we're obviously talking about meetings, but you guys at Total Interaction do a lot more than meetings. So how else do you use this?
Okay, that's a good question, actually. So we've used it for, let's say you're in sales. We recently used it for helping people in sales to do territory planning. In marketing, great for custom messaging. So looking at from 4 different quadrants. Worked for a company and did strategic whole brain planning with them. And they basically looked at their organization, where it was going, and planned their vision and how they were going to get to that vision using whole brain thinking. So it's really, really useful because a lot of teams or a lot of individuals don't naturally think in all these areas. So it forces them to think holistically. Now, I mentioned that not everybody thinks in these areas. There is a thing called the HBDI, or the Herrmann brain dominance instrument, which is a profiling tool. And what it does is it profiles your thinking preferences. It's an indicator of your thinking and communication preferences. So if I pop an example here, and I might grab my little pen down here. You can see this person has a big yellow preference and also a red preference down there. And so their natural propensity is holistic thinking, interpersonal thinking. But what we're probably most interested in today is this here, and possibly this here, but certainly this here. Because that would indicate that that person has a lack of preference in blue quadrant thinking, logical, analytical, fact-based, quantitative thinking. And what does that mean? Well, it means that for a lot of people that they can create blind spots. And that might be okay if they're talking to someone of the same preference. However, if you're talking to someone, for instance, who has got quite a bit of blue thinking and you forget to do some of those logical, rational, fact-based, quantitative pieces of communication, it can be very frustrating for them. Very frustrating. And the same in other quadrants. Now remember, only 3% of the population think in all 4 quadrants naturally. So if you had this profile and I was coaching you on virtual meetings, I'd be saying, okay, be very, very aware of some of the things that are allotted or aligned with blue quadrant thinking and maybe compensate for those, because invariably that's a safer route to take, or if you're American, route to take. So hopefully that is a get down and dirty version of what whole brain thinking is and what HBDI is. Do you reckon that's okay to move on, Michael, into the actual material that we're looking at today?
Yep, no, I think that's fine. And it's good to see that you remembered what I taught you all those years ago. So
yeah, I think that if you don't mind, Michael, I do remember when we way back when, back in the 90s, I think it was, Michael, you ran the accreditation for me, and one of the things I did notice, I hope me giving you this feedback, was there wasn't really much of an agenda up front on that accreditation. I sort of said, I remember saying, Michael, have we got sort of a detailed agenda of what we're going to be covering? And I remember you saying, oh, we're going to cover a number of areas, this and this, but we're going to go with the flow a little bit. And I could see maybe a couple of raising eyebrows. I'm not high green, but I think maybe for some of the people in the room it is, but it was fantastic, by the way. I loved it. It was great. And here we are many, many years later. So moving on, virtual frustrations. What is it that frustrates people, and what might you be doing to frustrate other people? Okay, we are moving into interactive world, and this is what I'm going to ask everybody on this call to do. What you can see is, based on our research, these are the key frustrations for a lot of people that we work with. And I'll go through them. And what I want you to do is think about what is the one thing that really frustrates you out of this list. The one thing that really frustrates you out of this list, and just put the letter that associates with that. So unclear purpose, so coming on a meeting and not being sure what it's all about, what the purpose of the meeting, why am I here? Making regular technical mistakes. I had one recently where the person just couldn't get their audio going. They started mucking around, oh, I don't know how to use this, don't know how to use that. Too much personal chit chat. So someone's spending out of an hour meeting, spending sort of 80% of it talking about their day, their weekend, their dog, their family. Introducing pets and family members onto the call. Here's my cat, here's my dog, this is my son. No agenda. So one thing I mentioned before, just not knowing what's going to be covered.
Okay, Paul, I'm beginning to look at the cascade of comments in the chat, and it's, I mean, as you would expect, there are about 260 people on the webinar at the moment, and so we're getting a pretty good spread.
Okay, can you give me a few letters? I'll just tick them off.
Well, yeah, lots of A's, lots of L's, lots of M's. Quite a few people are asking, can I tick them all?
Wow, I don't. Let's hope we do a good job for them. Okay.
Yeah, lots of, where's it gone? Yeah, L's, lots of L's.
Well,
Yeah, Carol Ann's gone A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. So
right.
that's a bit of everything. Quite a few P's coming through.
P's. Oh,
Which
no,
is
P's
also
correct. Oh, okay. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, A's.
Oh, okay. Not quite clear
Yeah.
what it's all about. That's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, Genevieve says, well, actually all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. And H is pretty common as well, meandering around off the point and so forth.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So
So
those would be, I think, the big ones. Yeah. A and B.
A and B.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's surprising. Okay. A and B. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I want you to be aware of what you checked. Just as a matter of interest, Michael, what would yours be? Oh, you're on. Can't hear you, Michael. You're on mute. How frustrating.
Yeah, that does frustrate me. Yeah, I get bored.
You get bored. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So this one here, board delivery.
Ah, yes, yeah, yeah. And again, people who don't look at the camera, because the camera's at the top up here, and yet often people are looking down here or...
That's N. Yeah. Okay. Well, you were only supposed to pick one, but that's okay. We'll give you those. I think the key thing here is lots of things can frustrate lots of people, and certain things really, really frustrate people. What I'm going to do now is hopefully kind of interesting. I'm going to overlay the whole brain thinking quadrants. So obviously, if we, with this amount of people, we're going to have everything kind of covered. However, what I want people to think about is, if you know your HPDI, have a think about whether what you ticked off fits into the quadrant of, for you, that frustrates you. So if you're high, if you know you're fairly people orientated, interpersonal, did it fit into the red? If you're big picture, holistic, like, okay, for instance, you, Michael, you pick boring delivery, you just get bored, fits into the holistic side of a yellow, which is expected. The green, if you're pretty much organized, sequential, having meandering meetings, does that fit there? And then you've got the blue, does it fit in there? Logical, rational, does that fit there? And it may or it may not, it really depends. But I want you to think about something deeply now. I want you to think about what you believe your area of least preference might be, your area of least thinking preference. So think about your area of least preference, and I want you to look at that quadrant. Have a good look at that quadrant and what's happening there. Do you think, I feel like using raise your hands. I said we weren't going to use raise your hands, but do you think that some of the things in that area of least preference may be things that you're doing? And I want you to have a good think about that. And if they are, then that's the quadrant I want you to focus on as we go through this webinar. If it fits into a different quadrant, then maybe you want to focus on that. But I want you to be aware of what are the things on that list that you might be doing that may frustrate others. And especially if it aligns with your area of least preference, that is critical, because it's something you're probably doing unconsciously, or you're certainly not doing, it doesn't come as a preference to you. So you need to think about very practical ways that you can remind yourself to do things that will stop you from doing that. So something if it's green, maybe it's, what's a practical thing you can remind yourself to have an agenda? If it's in the red, how can you remind yourself to look into the camera, which is one of yours, and you're high yellow red, Michael. So that makes total sense. So have a think about that. And now what we're going to do is move into what you can do about it. So one person's preference may be another person's frustration. And I know I've got this is actually a picture on the right-hand side of a woman who's uploaded a whole bunch of fantastic virtual backgrounds. And literally, she's got stacks of them, and they would all frustrate the heck out of me, I can tell you. But I'm sure a lot of other people would find it fine and quite amusing. So one person's preference may be another person's frustration. And now we're going to get into the real practical bit, which is, okay, what can you do about it? So what I did was I ran this webinar as a test with our trainers around the world, and I got their ideas. Now, they've also been running virtual meetings. So what you're seeing here is not necessarily just my ideas, it's a collaboration of a whole bunch of people from around the world who are experts in this area. And we talked about it and said, okay, so what are the practical things we can do? So I want you to think about these and see what works for you. Now, as we go through this, please send questions as we get into this. By the way, is there anything we should answer up to that point, Michael, or can we just move through?
No, hopefully you can carry on. I've been answering quite a few questions, typing as we go, and I haven't heard any screams, so I think we're doing all right at this stage.
Okay, here we go. Like this one. This is actually a nice whole brain one for everybody. And we use it at Total Interaction regularly. Next door to me is one of our guys who is head of software. We're moving into a whole new area of software. His preference is very, very strong. And when he joined, I said, what we do to speed up meetings, Rich, is we use a whole brain approach to starting any meeting. So a whole brain approach is essentially, this is any meeting, you start this off. It's a really easy tip. And basically it's what, why, and how. And if they don't know you, who. So the what fits in the blue, the why in the yellow, the green. Actually, let me just do this. All right, so if you're starting a meeting, the who is doing a bit of rapport building and an introduction to the people, who you are if they don't know you, or who anyone else is. If they already know you, obviously get rid of that. Then every meeting should be what, why, and how. What are we talking about? Why is it important, which is the purpose, and how are you going to cover it? So real easy rule of thumb, what, why, how, what, why, how. So I suppose in this webinar, what we're talking about is virtual meetings. Why is it so important? Well, it's important now because everybody's been doing it, but no one's really, people have actually had training on it. And people are going to continue doing it. 41%, is it, of people who are going to be continuing doing that. And how? Well, the how was that agenda area, those 3 areas that we're going to cover, which we're in the 3rd area right now. So, you good with that, Michael? What, why, how? Fantastic. All right, so that's the first tip. Anybody can use it. It's a great way of kicking off any meeting. Try it on your next meeting. You will be amazed at how quickly you'll get into the meeting and everybody's happy. All right, so we're going to go blue, green, red, and yellow now. We're going to look at, first of all, low A quadrant. What are some of the things that frustrate people in the A quadrant, and what are some of the things that you can do if you're low A quadrant? So if some of the things you think you might have been doing which frustrate people fit into that blue quadrant area, and you think you might be low blue, I guarantee you, you're probably doing this, some of these things. Oh, by the way, a short caveat, please. I was told by someone yesterday that some people may take offense to this because they're doing it. Let's be quite clear here. If you're dealing with people who are a lot like you, you're probably not frustrating them. You're probably not frustrating them. However, you just want to take this in consideration that you may be frustrating, say, 75% of the populace if you're doing something in this quadrant. All right, first tip. So if you're low blue, the possibility is that you might not spend the time getting the technology right and rehearsing or getting used to using it. The amount of times that I've come across people who have bought new headphones, like Bluetooth headphones, didn't test it out, didn't do any of the research on what a good Bluetooth headphone is or does, bought some stuff that sounds great, but you can't hear their voice. It's incredible. And it goes back to your point, Michael, of can you hear me? Well, no, I can't. And you know, if there's one basic thing to get right is know how to use the technology, know how to use, if you're using Zoom, if you're using Teams, before you get on the call. Because from a blue perspective and from a lot of people's perspective, if you're mucking around, they'll give you maybe one mistake, maybe two mistakes, but three, very frustration. If you can't get the volume right, then you're going to have problems. So get the technology right, and feel free to send questions in. I'll take them probably at the end of each section. Okay, this is one that may get a couple of people's noses out of joint. Limit personal sharing to the first 20% of the call. Now, I know that it's about rapport building at the beginning, and it's great to have that discussion about the weekend. That's fantastic, and what you're doing, and about possibly your family and other things. However, when you have 80% of a meeting, that can really start frustrating some people who aren't that people orientated. So if you know you do this, maybe you could put a point in the diary or maybe on your watch or something that actually says, I should finish and move into the actual meeting proper within 20% of that meeting. Make sense?
Quick question, Paul, I'm getting is, do you include the dog and the cat in this 20% or?
Well, I'd say the dog and the cat, unless you are talking about dogs and cats and your business is about dogs and cats, or the meeting is about dogs and cats, I would suggest, well, you know, that dogs and cats, moving on to that, thank you very much for that. Dogs and cats, let's talk about dogs and cats. There is something about cats that like to get in front of the camera when you're on a meeting. I get that. And invariably, you're going to want to introduce the cat, but we don't need a biography on the cat when you introduce them, where you got them. I also understand it can be very difficult when you've got a cat, because you're not going to get your cat, are you, Michael? Oh no, thank God. Oh, you go. It's okay. The bear. Yes, very nice. So that's great. Introduce your bear for a short period of time and let's move on. But if it's nothing to do with the meeting, I'm not quite sure if that is really 100% appropriate. So sure, if a cat jumps in front of the camera, fine. But a whole introduction is not really required. We also had one situation quite recently when the person had their camera pointed towards the rest of the house, and we actually had the son of the person we were speaking to getting, well, they were pretty much naked except for some underwear, and then they got called over to be introduced. So you probably wouldn't have that happen in a real face-to-face meeting, but the reality is that maybe not having your camera pointed towards the rest of the house when you've got people moving around and then introducing them, just keep it as professional as you can, especially if you're low blue. Okay, getting into some critical pieces, which is before you have the meeting, ask yourself the question, which is, what is the core purpose of this meeting? And then write it down in a sentence. So what is the purpose of it? Now, it's not just the subject of the meeting, but what is the purpose of this meeting? That's kind of what it's about and what you want to get out of this, or what it's about and why everyone's there. I have to say, Michael, I do remember having a meeting in your old office. I believe you've moved recently. I only saw that yesterday, but in your old office, there was a company called HRDC there, and I had a meeting, face-to-face meeting back then, with the CEO, and we were about 20 minutes in, and she said, what are we talking about here today? I went, oh man, I didn't actually tell her right up front what we're talking about. And although it may seem really obvious to you, this may be the 20th meeting that person's had that day, and to have it clearly enunciated what this meeting is about today and what we're talking about today is really important to a lot of people. If you're low blue, it probably doesn't come that naturally to you. If it's something that doesn't come naturally, write it down beforehand. Okay, so we're through the blue, and hopefully we've got a few additional questions, which I'll come back to. Things to work on if you're low B quadrant, low green. Here we go, Michael. That's you and me. All right, so the first thing is the how. Have an agenda. What are the areas you want to cover? Have an agenda, write it down, and then send it to them. Now, people may think this is a little bit particular, but if they're not interested in the agenda, it's not a preference for them to know what you're going to cover, how you're going to cover it, they probably won't look at it anyway. However, for those people who are interested, it's great. And it's pretty good for you as well because it keeps you on track. So I've got an example, the problem, the options, what does and doesn't work, or who does what, I should say. So simply write it down. If you know it's something you don't send regularly, write it down and enunciate it right at the beginning. This is what we're here to talk about, and this is what I thought would cover. It doesn't have to be written down, it doesn't have to be a slide, but just telling them how you intend to cover your meeting. All right, this is a tough one for a lot of people because I know a lot of people do back-to-backs meetings. And what happens invariably is we love to block out meetings in 60 meetings, well, I do anyway, 60-minute chunks. That's what the calendar seems to love to do. But what it does mean is it can be really frustrating if you're not on the meeting when everyone else is and you're stuck waiting for the host to turn up and it's already 10 minutes past when you were supposed to have the meeting. You're eating into other people's time. For those people who aren't that interested or not that worried about that and they just run along on every meeting, that's okay. But let's face it, for probably about 75% of the people, you're sucking up their time, and the least you could do is turn up to your meeting 10 minutes early. So maybe make your meetings 50 minutes. So you got 10 minutes before your next meeting if you're doing back-to-backs. It is a frustration, believe it or not, for a lot of people. Okay, I think this is the final one on green. Now, there are many, this is not supposed to be a deep training course on this, but I'm just covering them on a top line basis and then deal with questions. Think about the next steps prior to the meeting. I work with someone, I hope they don't mind me mentioning Ursula, high green thinking, very process orientated. And I'll say at the end of the meeting, what did you think of that meeting? And she'll say, well, I was sitting there with my pen ready to see what next steps were going to happen at the end of this meeting, and nothing actually was agreed and nothing was covered. In fact, there wasn't a section for next steps. So I consider that to be a waste of the meeting time. She puts it in a much nicer way. Plan the next steps that you want to happen at the end of the meeting before your meeting. What do you want to happen first, second, and third, and think about who you'd like to do what. It's amazing. If you do that, it'll really help with the meeting. But if it doesn't come naturally to you, force yourself to plan those next steps before you go into the meeting. How are we doing, Michael? Good.
Yeah, no, we're doing well. Yeah.
All right, we're hacking through this into the moving from the blue and the green into the red. All right, so we deal in with a lot of technology companies and financial services companies, and we find that a huge amount of people that we work with have this kind of profile, which is quite low red. And so this is low people orientated thinking. And if you're not online and you're not thinking this is you, then think about some other people. You can give them some tips. So what are some of the things that we come across that the low reds find happen? Okay, so typically what happens is you just go straight into the meeting. It's the opposite of the high reds, where you've got all this talk. There's no talk, there's no rapport. So what I would suggest is, if you're talking to a client or a customer or maybe a partner, or but you haven't met them before, even if you have met them before, do a bit of research on what you might have in common with them. Now, go to LinkedIn. That's a great way of looking at who you've got in common. And also a great thing I found in LinkedIn is where they're from. So I've got a meeting later on today with a gentleman who is in the US. Is it later today? Oh, no, it's early tomorrow morning. Couldn't be later today, it'd be asleep. But I found out that he went to Manchester University and he worked in London, because it's all in LinkedIn, and we've got about 18 common connections. Now, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, but maybe just enough to show that, well, okay, he's obviously from the UK. I'm from the UK originally. My father went to Manchester University. I've been to Manchester. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on that, but maybe just a little bit of an opportunity to build a bit of rapport at the beginning. So do a bit of research and just spend maybe a minute on, hey, George, I believe you, are you from Manchester? Oh, okay, Manchester University. Oh, my father went there. And then you went to London, you worked for this company. I've worked for them. Do you know so-and-so? And it's great when you can start dropping names of people that you both know. All right, look at the camera. We are trying to emulate a face-to-face situation. And hopefully when you're in a face-to-face situation, you would be looking at the person. The only problem is that if I'm looking at your picture, Michael, down there, and I think you mentioned this before, I'm not actually, it doesn't seem like I'm looking at you right now, right? Where I want to be looking is there at the camera, which is right there, but it's all blanked out. So we kind of need to think of ways that we can help ourselves to remember that. Now, this is what I've got on my computer, but I just saw one this morning. I won't ask him to bring it in. I saw one this morning of someone who's just got two little eyes on either side of the camera. Very, very cool. I actually prefer that. I'm going to change it to just having two little eyes stuck on either side, just to remind yourself that's where I should be looking. Yeah. Okay, moving on. I believe we've got lots of questions, so I'm not going to, some great questions. I've got big signs and some great questions in the Q&A and personal insights, right, coming through chat. Right, I'll move on and we'll hear about those. So less about me, more about you guys. All right, before and after. Ensure your expression can be seen. When we're in a face-to-face meeting, it's amazing the difference that it makes if you can see the person's face, because what they're doing with their face sends out way more information than just what they're saying. This is the real beauty about this. Very frustrating if you've got a light source behind you and you can't see yourself. One of the easiest ways of checking this out now, and you probably don't have your video on, but maybe on your next video call, have a good look at yourself and say, can I be seen? Now, one of the ways, as you can see there, is just move away from a light source. Light sources are changing all the time, aren't they, Michael? It's winter now, and what was a great light source is not a great light source. Michael, just before we came on, the sun came down and shot through, lit his chin up in a very strange way. So this is what I've got right here. This is a picture of how it looks right now. And I've got a light, just a standard light, table light behind me. And what I've done is I don't know where I can point here, but you might be able to see, we go. If you can see, I've got this is baking paper. The great thing about baking paper is it's heat resistant. Don't use tissue. I know someone who did that, and there was a bit of a safety issue there. So yeah, if you're using this, use baking paper. And what it does, it creates a bit of a filter, like a professional photographer's filter. So when you switch it on, you get this. Now, and I won't even try and switch it off, it's way back there. But what it does, it gives you a reasonable light, which lights your face. And even if you've got some light behind you, it works really, really well. All right, moving into one of the big things we've noticed is in meetings, it's supposed to be a two-way interaction. A lot of higher eds really like that two-way, that opportunity to interact, which I'm going to give you in a moment. But if you're not that way inclined, it's a good reason to write down on your agenda, because you probably got one, what you can do to engage with them as you go through your agenda. The problem, let's check in, the options, let's get some ideas, who does what, ask them. So make sure you've got something written down on your agenda that forces you to interact with those points. Because if you go with your natural propensity, you'll probably forget. And finally, on this, sound more interested. Okay, I know this is a tough one, but a lot of people we work with who are low blue, they don't have much eye contact, and you get very monotone talking, and it doesn't sound like you're very interested. You need to work on upping your interest level with your voice modulation. This is a tough one, but just be aware, record yourself and listen to the recording and ask yourself, do I sound interesting? Do I sound interested? Okay. I think we're doing, okay, right, okay. Let's go through the yellow. Low yellow. Right. Explain up front why they should listen, why it's important. I think that is one of my biggest frustrations in meetings. I'm high yellow and people get into a meeting and I'm like, why am I here? Why are we having this another blasted meeting? And I don't know why it's important. Explain to them up front why it's important. Write it down beforehand. Use metaphoric visuals. If you're going to use visuals, on the left-hand side, I don't know about you, Michael, but I probably wouldn't even bother reading it. It's too much information for me. Now, if we add a metaphoric visual to it, then we can get the point across that we're trying to get across. So metaphoric visuals work really well to support the data. And finally, the final one of all these pieces is, and this is actually a gentleman in England who is being interviewed. And I know. What does this say about his life? What does this say about his mind? It's obviously a very extreme example, but the amount of people who will have, if you're going to have a meeting in your bedroom, maybe just turn it around. You know, turn the camera around so you're not pointing at the bed. And if you are going to be at the bed, maybe make it and make sure you haven't got the washing out. It from a perspective of looking at a person, I spend most of my time looking at their background, because if there's things that are distracting me, I'll probably look at them. So please clean up your background. Virtual backgrounds. This is becoming the clip art of face-to-face virtual meetings. And there are so many people out there who have got so many interesting clip art backgrounds or virtual backgrounds, and you can put a virtual background on. Yes, it's exciting, but just like clip art, people start to groan. So try and pick one that's just simple. So Michael, that's a great background there. It's nice and simple. It's professional, very good. This is real, it's not virtual. It's just, I don't suggest you necessarily have your logo up there, but keep it simple. So some examples would be, find a wall like this gentleman has there, or just keep it nice and professional and simple in the background. Take the stuff off the table, keep it easy, keep it simple. Okay, so in summary, and then we move over to you, Michael, and you can take questions and tell me what's going on. In summary, these are the 4 things. Whole brain approach has proven to improve results in business communications. So why not leverage it for this? What doesn't frustrate you may well be frustrating your stakeholder. Focus on areas that you recognize may be blind spots for you, okay, and compensate. But compensate for those areas of low preference. It does require some extra commitment. So write it down, create some visual reminders, do something for your next meeting that will help you to compensate. And that way, we found that the effectiveness of your meetings will improve. Over to you, Michael. I think we've got about 10 minutes. I believe we've got some great questions. I can't see them. What do we got?
Okay. Yep. Okay, first of all, thanks, Paul. That was terrific. And I think what you actually did while you were talking about what to do to run an effective meeting is probably run one. So, well, yeah. So it's always good to see it in action. I've answered quite a lot of the questions as we were going through. There are 2, I guess, lingering questions. One, there are quite a lot of questions and comments about, I guess, the technical aspects of meetings. And the last few were all about backgrounds and, you know, bookcases and what do you do and so forth. I know for those of you who want to know more about, in this particular case, Zoom, there are some great how-to videos available on the internet on all these platforms, and they're well worth getting into and having a really good play around so that technically you are on top of it. The other question that's kept coming, and for me, it's a difficult one to answer. And Paul, it was about when you introduced the whole brain model and, you know, the why, the how, the who, and the what. Yeah. And it's all about, all the questions are about, you know, is there an ideal sequence? Which one do you emphasize? Surely it's about the people first. Is it about the purpose and so forth? And yeah, that's the one. Now, I guess my answer would be, honestly, it depends. Depends on so many things. The important thing is address them all. Right?
Up front.
That's right. But, you know, the emphasis might be a little bit different. It might be absolutely critical to make sure you've got the right people on the bus first. Right. It might be critical to tell people why they're there because, you know, that they don't know and so forth. So to me, there's no real one answer to that, except tick them all off.
Yeah, I agree because, you know, as you would know, it doesn't really matter as long as you cover them all off at the beginning. Yes. What we do is at the beginning of the meeting, it depends, you know, who, if you know, is optional because it's, you know, if they already know you, it's no point, but the who can also be a little bit of rapport building in the red. What we say is what, why, how at the beginning of the meeting, especially, you know, most people know that we're going what, why, how, but we simply sit down and go, okay, so we're having this meeting, what, why, how? And that's a reminder for the other person to go, oh, what we're talking about this, the reason we're talking about it is this, and I thought I'd cover this and this and this. Because we've, you know, it's part of the culture here, I guess. It means that everybody is prepared for that meeting for the what, why, how, and they think about the what, why, how beforehand. As long as you cover off in one way or another, who is there, you know, there's some sort of introduction, as long as they know at the end of this what the purpose is, and as long as they know generally what we're going to be covering, before you actually get into it, it doesn't matter which order it in. It's like it's a model. It's a model, not necessarily a process. So as long as you get it done beforehand, that's fine. The order is totally up to you.
Yeah.
We recommend what, why, how.
And again, as you're talking, some more comments. And I mean, Anita's saying, you know, in this busy world that unless she knows the purpose of the meeting, it's hard for her to decide whether to attend or not. And then, you know, Mick is saying that the who is more important. And I think that's the second comment I guess I'd like to make in summing up is we will make the chat available. And when you read through the chat, you're going to see the variety of comments. And for me, the insight in the chat is that we are in for a very, very frustrating future because everybody wants something different.
This is why, you know, coming back to him, this is sort of, here's the plug for Herrmann International.
Yeah.
If it is not easy, it is not easy to do things that don't come naturally. I cannot stress that. The amount of people who have got great intentions for a meeting and then don't do it. So you talk about technology, for instance. For a lot of people who are, their preference is just not to work on that technology, it's kind of doing stuff, coming up with things that will force you to check and get the technology right. One of the easiest ways, for instance, around technology from a high yellow red perspective is, and we did it this morning, and we did it yesterday, which was let's actually do it as a, you know, let's just check, let's go through the process as if we were doing something before we do it, and just make sure we don't have anything that's going to come up and bite us. And invariably, if you go through it, experientially. Now, I know for those people who are high blue green, and thank you, Darren Howard, I just saw your hand come up. For those who are high blue green, their preference isn't just to do it and see what happens beforehand. They actually think it through. But for those who naturally don't think about the technology and aren't necessarily technically orientated, just do it beforehand. Just run through it as a dry run, and things that will come up and bite you will invariably come up and bite you. Oh, we can't actually hear. Oh, we didn't actually have the video on recording, all these things. So it's thinking about ways that you can do before you get into the moment, as well as things you can do when you get in the moment that will remind you just to focus on the things that don't come naturally.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Paul. And just a quick comment. I see, hi Anne, I see that Anne Herrmann Neddy, all the way from the Carolinas, has joined us. So a special hi to her. And her comments again is, it doesn't really matter what order you do them, is, you know, so long as you do them. That's the important thing.
Well, if Anne says it, then absolutely go, because she is, you know, the global CEO. And
yeah.
Hi, Anne.
Okay, let me try and quickly summarize it. We started by saying that, you know, 41% of people at least want to stay home, will stay at home, you know, and therefore will be working online. And with second lockdowns coming, that is inevitable. 62 million downloads. So the chances are your neighbor has Zoom. Everybody has Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is. So the reality is, you know, that videos are here to stay. Video meetings, video whatever. So if they're here to stay, so are the frustrations. All right? And we've just talked, the simple way, I guess, to start dealing with these frustrations is to, you know, think about your own preferences, think about others, think about a whole brain approach, and remember, you know, the what, the why, the who, and the how. And as Paul said, so many meetings now are just at the touch of a button, all right? But you still have to stop and think before you touch the button, so that next time you touch the button, you start your meeting by saying, can you hear me? Then you know, because of your preparation, that everybody is going to say, yes, I can. And that's what we want. So thanks, Paul. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Jersey. I've seen a lot of familiar faces on the panels today. Savas, how are you? So great to see you all. And yeah, I look forward to the next meeting that any of you run.
And before you go, guys, please, the webinar is going to be sent, recording is going to be sent, the slides can be sent to you. All we ask is that you answer the the questionnaire, a very short 3 or 4 questions survey after this webinar. It'll pop up straight afterwards. And we're happy to send you all this stuff. We just ask you, could you please complete that it's a little bit of research from our perspective, 4 questions. That will really give us an insight into what's going on out there. And if you want any more information.
Yeah. Okay. See you soon.